And what I mean by that is that groups are coming out from the university, even now with COVID. So we're figuring out programming, in-person programming. However, majority of our programming has been able to be moved to virtual. So I'll just give you a little, for me, I'm always interested in the context before the facilities, because I strongly, strongly believe that function should dictate form. If you don't know what you're trying to do to build something and then try to figure it out, you'll constantly be fighting. So if you can envision as best you can, what is it that I want to do, then you can build accordingly. So I'm going to first give you that context and then explain that build accordingly, and you're going to help me remember that, because I am the tangential queen. There's a lot going on up there.
Well, and this goes part of the course too. We were talking a lot about, it's a huge topic, right? And so we house this under adventure recreation, and we got into the component of it, but we talked a lot about the difference between outdoor education facilities, such as here, and the pay-to-play model. Neither of which are wrong or anything, they're just different. And so I think this is kind of the basis. What we were talking about is form and function of outdoor education.
Yes, so if I were to meet you in an elevator on the 5th floor, and you said, what's the Browne Center? By the time we got to the 1st floor, I would have said, what you do is important. How you do what you do is just as important. The Browne Center works on social emotional learning and emotional intelligence to help people gain the skills towards that how, and to live into a better place for themselves, their classroom, their organization, whatever it might be. Browne Center works with intact groups of people. We don't do open enrollment programming. It's really important. Intact groups of people to help them do what they're doing better, not by focusing on the task, such as I was working with a group that does aerospace engineering adhesives. I don't know. But I do know how to work better together around organizational health and providing an environment where everybody can bring their best work sustainably to the organization. So it started as a challenge course in the woods. And now we're leading with the outcome, such as organizational health, or if it was K-12 programming, it might be social emotional learning. And then we choose the activities as practice grounds for people both to discover what they don't do particularly well, but mostly to practice the skills of what they need to do better in order to get their goals accomplished, whether that be creating a psychological safety and a healthy learning environment in the kindergarten, or whether that be how do we plan, as I did on Monday with a group, around succession planning in a family-run business of $200 million. So whoever shows up, whatever they have in their pocket or don't have in their pocket, whatever age they are as important as the next person. So though we have a huge sliding scale, our corporate day will average around $3,000 a day per group of 12.
That'd be for corporate type groups, right?
Yep, and in our youth and student programming, that will be more like $300 a day. It is not the same faculty.
No.
It was 30 years ago, thankfully, because I was one of those people. 30 years ago, build a ropes course, and basically better than sliced bread. If you come, you'll get better. Everybody was just like, woo, newest and best. And indeed, to some degree, that novelty worked. But at some point, which was, I foresaw somewhere in the 80s, that, my high schoolers here, they're going to be my corporate executives, and they're going to be saying, been there, done that. So in other words, I was lucky enough to be at the beginning of the market of experiential training using challenge courses. And I'd like to say I was fortunate enough to have a light bulb experience to say I have to lead with the outcome, not the methodology. If there's anything that makes a difference, I think oftentimes with recreation and education, it's that. With the recreation or recreation, it's the moment that people are asking you for. In education or therapy, it's the outcome that people are asking you for. So if someone were to call and say, I have a group and we'd like to experience the ropes course, say, tell me more, you end up sounding like, hey, you know, we want to have a fun time, we want to this, all that is wonderful, it's great. That is not what we do, and let me refer you to Camp Lincoln, to this, to that, to the rest. Because if I started doing that, I would be diluting the brand really quickly. During cash flow tight times, wouldn't this be a lovely place to have a wedding? And what about, and what about, and what about? Talk about mission creep. Because as soon as we do that, or rent it out for, as we did at one point to Project Adventure, we become that brand and we don't control our quality. So as much as it hurts during downsizing, I've been holding true ever since the start around that brand. So any questions? Because I can just, that's why I'm doing the mask. I can't do this and talk straight for 2 hours, and nor do you want me to talk straight for 2 hours. But I do have some things here that might be useful.
Sure.
So stop me anytime.
No, it's good.
So I was lucky enough to live with Evelyn Browne. And Evelyn Browne lived across the fields from here in a building in a home, and I helped bring in the firewood and the hay back then in exchange to be able to live. So very much like what Mason's doing. We just swap labor for a place to live. In doing that, we became fast good friends. And clearly her desire for creating a place for people to come and practice within the natural environment around how to be connected together and ideally connected to the natural world was right up my alley. I had done a self-design major. In 1983, I graduated at UNH, undergrad in outdoor education. You might have heard this thing, it's outdoor education. So, yep, been around a little while with it. So Ev, little story also about Ev. If she's famous for one thing, if she could be famous for many. She, in a group of what the press called irate housewives, back in the 70s, warded off the most wealthiest man in the world, Aristotle Onassis. Have you heard the story?
No, I was just telling Alex
Like
the story on the
5 minutes ago.
But
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't remember his first name.
Oh, yeah.
I told him it was something, what did I think it was?
Something cool with an A.
Yeah.
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 So you've probably heard of Jackie O, with big sunglasses.
John
and
F.
everything else.
Kennedy's wife,
Yeah. So
Jackie Onassis.
later on married him. So plot thickens.
Yes.
Great
Ooh.
stuff. Anyway.
This is a really interesting piece of history
Yeah.
right here, though.
So Ev heard that land was being bought up in the area. Landowners were being approached, and she's like, "That's weird. Why is there a run on building right now?" She and other people started scratching around and found out that Aristotle Onassis was behind it. And they're like, "What's this about?" And they find out he wants to build at that point what would have been the largest oil refinery in the world. So it would have
Right here.
disrupted from northern Mass coast, all of New Hampshire, into a little bit of Maine. Because oil refinery takes a tremendous amount of water in terms of its cooling and processing and everything like that. Well, Ev knew the value of this estuary, and she knew the value of this land, and she knew once you did that, it could never go back. And she's like, I'm not going to do it. So with the neighbors, literally on this road, I could go on with Bennett and this and that and the rest, and it's a play, and it's trying to be made a movie right now called Oily They. They banded together and created a group they called Save Our Shores. There was a magazine that was very popular at the time called Life magazine, and there's a picture in that magazine of Ev and Nancy Sandberg in the field. They had put gasoline in a gigantic SOS, Save Our Shores, and when Onassis flew over in his private helicopter, they were in these little aprons and rolling pins because the press called them irate group of housewives, even though Ev was one of the first full professor, that female. But Ira Acres said, oh, okay. And so as they flew over, they torched it, and SOS came up on the field. So they're shaking, they're rolling.
Some
things.
characters in that group.
Yeah, yeah.
Ev Browne was the real deal.
The real deal. So think of it this way. Here's 5 women. The state of New Hampshire wanted the tax revenues and the jobs from an oil refinery. And a person had all the money in the world to do it. And these 5 women, because of what I call social capital, relationships, they convinced their neighbors not to sell.
And effectively protected all of this area in the entire New Hampshire seacoast. They really wanted this property because you've seen the Isle of Shoals, 3 miles off. They would run an underwater pipeline to it, and then that would be a loading area for super tankers, because big oil tankers can't come this close to shore. So that was like the crux of the operation. But they were doing it very sneaky.
Yeah. And what they found out recently is it wouldn't have worked. Meaning the refinery would not have worked because the water's more brackish, meaning because of the 7 rivers, like I didn't go into Great Bay, there's more pure water than salt water. So their mathematical calculations weren't going to work. So hard to know what they would have done. But I could go on and on about the story because it's so great, but I love to tell it to various groups that it connects to their mission of, which is really, I think, the mission of the Browne Center, which is understanding social capital. How do I create value in the relationship to self and to others so that we can do amazing things? Most people think of capital, they think of money. What better story than that to say that actually nothing happens without relationship? You can have all the money in the world as he did, and it didn't happen. So I just love telling that story. There's other things you'll see as we'll go for a walk through the Browne Center. You'll see ice axes on the, actually they're called alpenstocks, on the inside of the chimney. And Ev came from a very pioneering family. Her father, Belmore Browne, was one of the first to climb what was then McKinley, which is now Denali. If you know anything about that mountain, there's a small peak before the summit, and it's called Browne's Tower, which is Ev's father. The pictures you'll see in the hallway, his father was a famous artist and also worked within the military, and these are all training documents for the Arctic Training School, like how to shoot a bear, how to survive if you're in the wilderness, and those kind of things. So I find it really important. One of the tenets of sustainability is sense of place. And so I love to tell where we are and the history of it, but I also love the sense of places, like sense of place and time. So these things don't just like, oh, they're here. It's like, no. It's people with passion that connects to something that's important to them, important to others, and then make it happen. So fast forward with Ev, after the Onassis had gone by, she goes, that's not enough. So back in the 80s, and I was living with her at that time, she said, ooh, there's money available through the Bush administration to protect land around estuaries. So this property was one of the keystones in establishing what's called GIBNR, Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And so I got to be a part of helping make that happen with Ev. I was kind of on her coattails as a graduate student trying to understand, like, how do you protect property? Like, what does that mean? So what does it mean? This acreage is what we have. I don't know. Little sequence might help. But. So Ev Browne lived here, actually right here. You can see the property, and that's where I got to live, kind of as a caretaker. She parceled out 3 5-acre plots that could be built on. So this plot right here is what you passed in the road coming in. And guess who bought it? This is where we are. And then this where we'll walk to. So 3 5-acre plots that could be built on. The rest of this, except for here, was all put into conservation easement. So it means that the building rights were sold to the federal government. It's managed by New Hampshire Fish and Game, and it has to stay in what's called perpetuity. So every year, Fish and Game comes, walks the property, and says, more invasive species, or I see you cut here, or what are you planning? And you have to have a management plan. So it's interesting because Ev gave this 5 acres to the university. A colleague of mine, Dennis Meadows, bought this 5 acres knowing that someday we'd want it for the Browne Center. But we didn't have the money for that. And then I had bought this 5 acres. So the rest of the West Field, interesting enough, which is all this, Ev said, I love the university clearly. I gave 5 acres. But the university is people, and after a few generations, people might not be connected as you are. I want to give you this land as a steward, knowing that you'll do the same in the future. So it's kind of crazy because I'm an abutter, I'm the executive director, and I'm the landowner.
The trifecta.
That's right. Sometimes it's a complicated relationship because all those hats don't agree. But nonetheless, I thought it was fascinating that Ev, in her future site, went, wait a minute, the university can do things outside of local laws. And I'm not sure I'm okay with that. I could see the university wanting to build a dorm here someday, or this or that, and she's like, nope. So that's what she ended up doing with the land. And as much as
a conservationist, setting the land aside.
Want to hold that for a hot second?
Sure.
And having the foresight, of many of our forefathers and foremothers, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is the term, to protect it. So awesome.
Yeah. And as cool as it sounds, like, what? You get to own that land? So for anybody else, it might be a liability, but I like riding on tractors because it's 40 acres of fields that need to be mowed at least once, if not twice a year. And it's another 30 acres of woodlot that has to be managed. Also, every few years, you have to have a land stewardship plan. So it costs a lot of money to own this land that's easement, and you can never build on it. So thankfully, my tax bill on 70 acres is about $600 a year because you can't do anything but work on it.
That's the trade-off for a conservation easement, is that your taxes are significantly lower. But you have to, as was mentioned, right, all these different land management strategies. Have a management, physically manage it, so on and so forth. But it's protected in perpetuity forever. That's the key. Can't be developed.
And with this, she was able to expand it so that Gibner is now made up of over 2,000 acres. So pretty exciting. So other people were, oh wait, I want that too.
Right.
And so off it went. That's a little bit about the land, the history. Any questions about that so far? Yeah.
You said the Bush administration gave the money. Which Bush administration?
They senior.
Probably Bush 1, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
I don't think it was in Bush 2's agenda yet. No.
And also you think it's pretty cool because of their property in Maine.
Right.
They might have been an extra with coal there.
Yeah,
That's,
exactly.
I didn't think it was,
Any other questions? All right, I'm going to weave in little things here and there. So I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Anybody a Jersey person? Actually,
My mom's from Teaneck.
there's always one. I've rarely had a group, even of 2 or 3, that someone isn't connected to Jersey, so I just had to go there. And growing up in Newark, New Jersey, one of the things is I used to get in trouble for climbing on buildings because I loved to climb. And that's all we had. There wasn't much grass, even back then. So I said, when I grow up, I'm going to design a building that you're supposed to climb on. That's the rock climbing chimney. So how did this come to be? So when I bought that 5 acres from Evelyn Browne, I ended up going to house building school in Maine at Shelter Institute, and it was incredibly helpful. Not just to build my own house, I mean, we're talking rent the backhoe, like every part of it. But in terms of building future facilities, of which you're going to tour in just a bit. So truly from the ground up idea. So in this building, careful what you ask for, right? Class of 1937 and 42, in honor of Marion Beckwith and Evelyn Browne, their teachers, they gave money. They gave about $300,000, and one of the people in the class was an architect. And they are like, I will donate the plans for your building. And they did. And there's no way we could have built it. And in my heart of hearts, there's no way I wanted to build it. It was like, how do we get out of this one?
Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, not an easy one. So, through a lot of, social talking and this and that, was able to figure out how to join with this person to be part of a focus group to do what's called a design build process. If you don't know about this, it's really cool. I love to use it. So design build process is you say the specifications of what you want. I want a part of the building that can be climbed on. I want X amount of office space. I want this. I want multi-use that. So you put your list of specs along with your order of priority. Then you send it out to reputable architects and firms that are approved by the university system. Architect will connect with a construction company, and then they put forth a design. You have a thing called a design charrette, where it's like a poster session where they all say what makes theirs great. And it was really fascinating. One, I couldn't find it, I looked for it. One of the designs was, it looked like a turret of a castle. I mean, that's all it was. It was this big round thing that went up, kind of like a smokestack. But he was like, you can climb on the whole thing. And I'm like, ooh, I'm not sure we're going for that. But anyway, you get to see, you don't fall in love with how the walls are going to work. You fall in love with the why of it. And so this building was built, and very many interesting things of which I was very glad to have had a building background, such as when we walk into the main room, look up and see the main beams, because the walls were already up. They hadn't put the roof on when they decided that the roof can't be supported. And they had an engineering stamp, and I was like, because I had actually asked them, like, how do you get that free span? Oh, they must have internal trusses, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, nope. So, like, who pays for that? Because it's not going to work. And winter's coming. So, this was one of the first places in New England that used what's called a paralam, which is you strip the fibers of a tree and you pressure laminate it. Because you can't have one timber because it has all these irregularities which are nutrients. So you'll see, in working with the construction company as colleagues trying to make something great, as opposed to you screwed up and you got to pay for it, we were able to get a much better building. But it started this way. It took a really long time to go, no, we all want to be proud of this. So before they broke ground, I required that we went and had a day on the challenge course. Because I said, how could you build something if you don't know what you're building it for? They're like, it's what we do all the time. I said, well, you're not going to do it here.
Not today.
And it was very interesting because in one of the activities, they touched, you're supposed to pass people through holes. And if ever there's an infraction of touching the holes, start over again. So they were halfway through. I'd been standing there, half of the people had touched on the way through. They, like most people, are waiting for me to say stop. At some point when they're all the way through, they're like, we did it. I'm like, that's great. I'm sorry, but you don't have a job. And they're like, oh, I'm like, no. Am I supposed to come and watch every single thing you do? You knew you touched, and you didn't say it. And if you can't say it when you're touching a string or a tree, what does that mean when you're building my kitchen, my roof, my floor? Like, we got to change this, And they're like, that's not how construction works. I'm like, that's how it's going to work here, So all that backstory.
Did they redo the obstacle?
They did.
Okay. All right.
And they were harder on themselves than I would have been. I was like, yes. But they, all of a sudden, we got into incredible conversations around, this happens all the time. I have to install these lights, and they're not going to look good. But if I go back and say the architect, they're like, that's not your job. So all of a sudden, they're individuals saying why they can't bring their best selves to a project. Like, okay, well, let's figure that out before we get started. So you can see every step of the way, if you can infuse the why and the pride. I mean, literally these rocks where it came from the dry stone basement that was here prior to the building. It's a cellar hole. And it would have been much cheaper to bring in other rocks. But the mason was so taken by the story, he's like, we can use it. You know, so if you can get people to be connected and realize that they're a part and not a financial transaction, it's really paid off. I still call some of the people I know in terms of it's happening again, you know, whatever the issue might be. It's also one of the first buildings that had in the floor heating, radiant heating. It's come a long way. I wouldn't advise it, but we tried. And it was around environmental. So there's many things I would have done differently, but you do the best you can.
Hindsight is 20/20.
That's right. We only had enough money to, actually I shouldn't say that. Well, yeah. Actually, we only had enough money to make the building weather tight. So you know what that means, just basically a shell. And that was it. That we ran out of money. So I was given my salary for a year to come out and finish the place and make it self-supporting, which meant be able to pay my salary. Thankfully, and not thankfully, it was a whopping $16,000 a year. I know.
Adjusted for inflation.
That's right. Okay, 25. And with a beach chair and a borrowed landline phone and a borrowed computer, I was like, hey. I can't write grants because the overhead for the university is a good 40%, so anything I'm going to go for, I'm not going to be competitive for. I can't raise money because that's what UNH Advancement does, and they don't want me to be in competition for their big campaigns. Well, I know how to work. I know how to do fee for service. So that's where I started, was going, okay, come on out and see, you know, if this helps kind of thing. But what are they coming out to is a few elements and not even, barely an airtight building. So I was like, okay, it's going to work. So I was like, what do I need to finish this place? I'm like, oh, we need curbing. Okay, I'm going to look. Oh, that's ink. Oh, look, it's an alumni of UNH. Perfect. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, Nutsing. I know you're an alumni of UNH, and I love your carpeting. And guess what exciting thing is happening at UNH that you could be a part of? Not asking for money. I'm just saying, in exchange for the market value of your carpeting that I will highlight, and I am highlighting it now, I will give you a day of training. So what's the risk? Is your time. So I did that with everything. I did that with Hewlett-Packard. Bless you, Hewlett-Packard, because it became the #1 client for the first 5 years of about $100,000 a year in fee-for-service work. I did that for coffee pots. I did that for rugs. I did that for... So what I'm saying here is that oftentimes you think, well, I don't have the money. And if you start and end there, you're not going to get very far. So resources is more than money. You got to remember, what do you bring into the game? And probably your passion and your drive and your connections is going to get you so much farther than you ever thought. And just so you know, it's about I figured it out, it was about a 1 to 10 ratio. For every 10 asks, which there's a lot in an ask, right? You have to research, one would come through. So you got to get used to a lot of no's. The other part was when I came into the building, my mantra to myself, because this is pre-computer world. It wasn't really being used in any business way that mattered, was mail something every day. So what that meant to me was I could not leave here until I figured out how I could reach out to someone who's going to help make this dream a reality. And sometimes, I mean, it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I'm like, what am I gonna mail? Who am I gonna mail it to?
I just want to go home.
That's right, damn it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good thing, because oftentimes with undergraduates in particular, actually more than that, but I hear people, they go, well, I sent out 10 emails. I'm like, well, you haven't communicated. They're like, no, I sent out 10. I'm like, no. Communication is not what you send out, it's what you get back. If you haven't figured out how to be relevant to your receiver, you have not communicated. So if I'm trying to communicate to someone that, they get 100 emails a day, why would they open mine? If they're a friend of my friend, I'll go, would you do an email introduction? Because they will open his. He will endorse me, and I will get back within that day. If I do not get back, I had just partly tainted and burned that relationship.
Social capital.
So careful of those email introductions. I always, I'll ask them, you want me to do an email? Oh, yeah. I'm like, tell me when you're ready to respond within 24 hours. And they're like, what? I go, I'm not wasting my social capital on your procrastination.
Like that.
So,
Should be a plaque.
so you get the idea. It matters, and it makes a huge difference. It's how this place got built, really. I should stop, take a breath there. Any questions? It's probably off the topic of facility.
No, but I think it's all into the background, because this is a really unique facility, and I was talking to Alex on the way here. That's why I wanted to bring up the sort of pay-to-play versus education facilities. I think that many of you have been to ropes course pay-to-play type facilities, but I don't think many have been to this type of facility and understanding the social capital and truly the blood, sweat, and tears and physical sweat equity that goes into a facility of this nature. And a lot of times there's a consistent theme to these types of places, that there's someone who puts a lot of love and time into it and wants to make that dream happen. And I think that is, this is a nonprofit facility, right? And so it allows, one of the benefits of a nonprofit, which I would consider a big pro for this facility, is that it allows the Browne Center to stay true to their mission and to not have mission creep. Kind of looping back to what Pam had mentioned earlier, right? You could easily say, we need some quick cash to throw 10 weddings, right? But as you alluded to, that dilutes the brand, right? It starts taking it in different directions. But the nonprofit mission allows you to have that flexibility. Unlike a corporate structure or something that you're just money driven, right? That is like, we need the cash now, that kind of thing, right? So this is a very unique. So I think it's all pertinent, in the background to the facility. But I have to ask you all, of this rock wall, and when we're talking safety, right, what kind of belay system is that? Are we talking static or dynamic? Dynamic. And what's the dynamic ratio of participant to?
1 to 1.
1 to 1.
Nice.
Love it.
Right?
Good group right here. Right?
Sweet.
See how they say it, like 1 to 1, like I've had something like 100 times.
A few other things about the same nonprofit. So nonprofit, as you know, is how you file for the IRS. It's not how we file, it's how we act. We're an auxiliary, and as an auxiliary, we're part of the university system of New Hampshire. This is the tough part. We might have done better to be a nonprofit, because we do not get a penny from the university. No salaries, no maintenance, no gas, no driving, zero, zip. And if anything, we fight off what's called an RCN tax each year. So the university, desperate for cash, even pre-COVID, wants to make this a profit center just by nature of fee-for-service. Money's coming in, can we have a piece of that?
But we don't want to give you anything in return.
By owning all the land around it, and by connecting to an academic mission, which is exactly why the Browne Center was built, we can say, no, 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 this is a clinical facility for our outdoor education majors. When our youth groups come in, people can shadow the facilitators and understand how to facilitate. Not like this staff training and then off you go, but you didn't have any mentors, you didn't have any on-ramp, you didn't understand how to make it. So really what puts us as a brand, a very high quality brand, is we have fabulous facilitators. You're only as good as the person who's fronting the customer. And our facilitators are fantastic. Many of them have their own businesses and they can make 2 or 3 times the amount in a day than what we pay them. The reason they work for us is, one, we think we're pretty fun, or at least they get to laugh at us. But the other is that they're learning new things because we're always bringing new activities. They're sharing theirs. They're getting connected to other facilitators that they can hire for their businesses. So it's really odd because we actually are competitors that are constantly hiring and supporting each other. So if you notice when someone called and said, hey, can I, pay to play? I said, no, Camp Lincoln. If someone said, hey, we're interested in this, and they're closer to Beverly, Mass, I go, you're welcome to come. Are you aware that Project Adventure's in your backyard? They're our competitors. We actually have times where all of our competitors, we come together and we say, how can we do staffing so people don't have to do staff training at every one of these different facilities? Can we have some reciprocity? So we passed level 1 ACCT, which is the certifying body, Association Challenge Course Technology.
Oh, they know.
I know, that's right. I saw the little light in the eyes of my thinking. Is that enough? Or what might you want to also do? We don't want a price fix, but what are you offering people in terms of pricing? So it's not just the biggest gorilla in the room gets to hire whenever they want. We even now are communicating going, hey, we got a huge group. We're needing 15 facilitators on October 21st. And maybe it's in June. We're like, can you hold off booking a big group at your facility? So that we're not all in this so we need to figure out how to keep per diem employees in business, staff. So we work together to try to create a livable wage and also year-round work for them.
That's another big pro of the facility, right? Is just collaboration with the industry that in many contexts of business is unheard of, right? Of reaching out and working with these people, and once again to that theme of social capital.
So it's super, super important not to go into, and it's hard, I tell you, it's really hard. If you go in with a scarcity mindset, that's what you're going to get. So you have to go into the all boats rise in a rising tide. If we do a great job and help people understand you can learn through these experiences, they're going to want to go to your facility too. So we don't hide activities, everything's shared. Hey, have you tried this one? What about this one? And it's tough because a lot of our competitors have actually gone out of business. Competitors might be seeing facilities like this. Northeastern had a place called Sargent Center. Started as a kids camp, same thing in the 80s. Wow, let's do corporate training. Oh, let's build facilities for that corporate training. You'd never find a kid on the property. Oh, we've got this, let's do weddings. 3 years ago, they sold it off. We're like, we got the value out of it. Let's sell it off to another university, actually. And it's basically a conference wedding kind of center. Same thing happened with Sargent Center up in Peterborough. There's an incredible camp, beautiful facility, lake, ropes course, and everything else. Very far away from BU, Boston University. So the academic mission was difficult. It had to be kind of during the weekend or in a semester. Academic mission kind of fell off. Wait a minute, fee for service. Up we went. When the tide went down with fee for service, corporate on challenge courses, so did they. Sold it off. So you can see why I'm like, this needs to be connected to the academic mission, because as soon as we're seen as a fee-for-service nonprofit or making organization, as one dean, not our current dean, but as one dean said, it's like, I don't get it. Why don't I just rent it to you for $1? Here for a year. You can keep all the profits. It will be great. I'm like, because as soon as we do that, it's over. The intent of why we came is gone. Thank you for all the money I can make, but that's not what I'm in it for.
That's a hard no.
That's yeah. And he said, just checking it, because I don't get it. I'm like, well, bad on me, because I got to show you how you can get it. Yeah, so a lot of pieces to get in concert with, and to be honest, I feel like my job as executive director, of course, it's, you know, keeper of the culture to some degree, but so is every single person there. But, you know, some people come in and out and kind of here, so, you know, making sure each person's feeling valued as they walk through the door. Even those who sometimes are like hostages, like, man, I don't want to be here. I'm like, that's okay. It's all right. Whoever you are, showing up as you are, it's totally fine. All of you is welcome here, is my line of what I try to promote when we're here. But with that, also that kind of keeper of the culture is like, how do you do transition planning? How do you do legacy? Sometimes it makes sense to connect to the dean because they are all about it. Sometimes there's a dean that's not all about it. And then we just don't go, hey, we're great. We're just like, we're just going to keep doing what we do. And then when it comes along where someone else thinks it's great, then we're great again. So my job, I see, is keeping healthy connections with the university and understanding what are their priorities so that the Browne Center can adjust accordingly. So early on in my career, I didn't realize that, and I just was like, we're the best! And they're like, wait, so we can tax you for being the best. I'm like, oh no.
We're not
no.
We're just mediocre, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. So there's a political side to it, as there will be for everything that we do. But with relationship being the forefront, I find it very doable because now I can call it, hey Kim, how do I do this? You know, as opposed to business service manager. What about? You know, so take the time to get to know people as people, no matter what their rank is, and it's gonna work out for you. Here you go. So, ready to walk and see other stuff?
Sure.
All right. So we're gonna do a kind of a breeze through the Browne Center. Do you see any dirt? Could you let me?
The telephone poles. To me, this is speaks to kind of a very chill, cool culture.
There's Mason guarding people from the bedroom. He's like, don't look over here. This is the parallels I was talking about.
So when you look around, right, you see the aesthetic that we're talking about, the larger open aesthetic, right? You see a lot of room flexibility, okay? These partitions that can come out can divide the room from separate uses. Look at all the chairs, all the tables, wheel-based, right? Move them all, fold them all up. You know, flexibility, I think, is a continued trend. So, what else do you folks observe when you look around? Other than puppies. Yeah. What else do you see?
Natural looking.
Natural looking, okay. What else?
Natural lighting.
Right, so we've got natural lighting, and it just goes along with it, yep.
Indirect, it's coming on the sides.
Sure.
Coming down.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You have indirect up there for sure, and then direct here, yep. What else do you notice? Yeah.
Yes.
Good our fireplaces, right? All these different little components that together make a critical piece. So I can't tell. Yeah, these are the. We'll get into these when we talk about gym and fitness facilities. But this particular type of carpet, we have parcels. So when one section wears out, can rip one square section out, right? Put it back in because certain areas will take a lot more abuse than others. Just little wear and tear items like that.
Is there anybody here not okay with dogs? Because that's the other thing.
We were playing salty.
Okay, we have many dogs in one place. So part of what retains good workers or people who can feel at home, and sometimes that means bring part of home with you. So,
Now Pam, talk to us a little bit about this in here, like ADA access, or are there ADA demands on the facility? Is that a norm? Is that not?
yeah, thanks. So this facility was finished in '93, so ADA wasn't seen as a whole, there wasn't a really big push for it, but it was a big push for me. So as you noticed, there wasn't any barriers or thresholds. There are some, we do have a ramp here, but not everyone, but for the most part, it's pretty good. You'll see that the signs also have braille, all kinds of different ways of trying to help make it ADA accessible, along with the bathrooms and the rails and the lifts and all that kind of thing.
And these doors being a perfect example, right? We talk about this a lot in class, that the language of ADA is reasonable. Right?
Yes.
What is reasonable? Is it reasonable to make every single door ADA accessible? I would argue no, right? Is it reasonable to make every single element ADA accessible? I would argue no, right?
Or the trail to get to it.
Right. And we talk about this, it's very cut and dry, ADA, an office building in downtown. It's much different in a Parks and Recreation setting. In Yosemite National Park, what is it? Every trail need to be ADA accessible, so on and so forth. So, but providing an equitable experience on the other hand as well for persons with disabilities. So.
The other thing you might not notice is that because of sound, there's glass. So that when you pull the air walls, it provides a little bit more of sound buffer.
You see that there? Glass panels there and here. So when you pull this partition out, right, the sound doesn't just travel over because you can hear, you get 30 kids in here, right? I mean, it's loud, I'm sure.
And this was not the building I wanted to build. It's kind of fun. We'll go down by the year and show you why. Because I couldn't imagine building a building that you had to say, no, you need to stay out. Because drywall, upholstered chairs were what I was told was necessary to attract the corporate work. But I was also working a lot with youth at risk, was the language back then. So it was like, oh, great. So I'm going to have so much repair, so much cleaning work, so much everything else, so that literally even to this day, youth groups rarely use this building. We keep them outside, or we're going to walk down to a facility that I was eventually able to build, that I hoped to build at first, but ultimately it was a good thing to build this first to get the money to be able to do other things. That I didn't want a building that you had to say no to someone. I wanted a building that you didn't need a sign. People just could be who they are and know that that was the right thing. So that's not the case for this building, unfortunately. We've had various groups in here that have created some damage in the past. Whether it be taking the cleaning fluid and spraying it all over the inside of the bath, which then you have to repeat the whole thing.
Who does that? I want to say in my mind they're children, but I hope they're.
Well, it's and it wasn't necessarily malicious. You got to remember, we also work with people with developmental disabilities, so everybody is welcome here. This place doesn't welcome everybody, so therefore I felt we needed to create a place that could be welcoming for everybody. So we'll be going for that one.
Other observations here, or thoughts, questions, comments? All right, you keep it going.
Thank you, Melissa. If we can handle it at the university, let's do that.
Of course.
I want to point over to this building, little barn you parked across from. So, in building this building and being allowed only one access road, I was like, I want a place where we don't have to rent porta-johns for our big youth groups, like 100 kids, and just 3 is not
Hey, so
enough.
you're in
Oh, yeah, so
good crowd here.
here, Clivus Multrum, because day users, people just don't want to poop in them. And so you just get all the liquid. So I'm literally going to my horse barn, getting manure to provide the solids to make the system work. You don't want that. Advanced composting system is a little bit better because instead of being a baffle that goes this way, it's up and down, and it's kind of hysterical because we've got this big tank in the living room going through it a few times a week.
Starting a locomotive.
That's right. But it works a little bit better. However, what we found is even then, we can't do it all with just the system. So in the end, all these wonderful composting systems are really just holding tanks and we get them pumped. Right, septic. And that's mostly because it's all liquid and not enough solid for the actual compost to take place. However, before learning that, I was trying. I knew I needed a building. I wanted a building that could have composting toilets and could have more storage. We're quickly running out of storage. Ideally, I didn't want to store tables and chairs in the main room and all kinds of different. With the university, because of their building codes, which are wonderful, but they're excessive. Like cement, which is normally has to be graded to 50 years, with UNH it has to be to 100 years. So these doors with the panic bars and this, everything is so much more expensive than you could do outside the university. That when I asked for a non-heated building that had ability to have 4 composting toilets and storage, the university small projects came back, and even with bidding it out and things like that, came back at 100, and this is at least 20 years ago, $150 per square foot of unfinished space.
Which is crazy expensive.
It should have been like 30.
Yeah. We could have done it for 15.
Yeah. That was just like, okay. So as you notice, the journey comes out, the dander comes up. So I went to tea school, grabbed some wood harvesting students, cruised the land, had them cut the timber. It was hysterical because my horses are not pulling horses, they're riding horses, and I'm like, you today are going to be a pulling horse. Pulled the timbers out with these horses that had no idea what they were doing, nor did I. Get the portable mill, milled the wood, brought it here, stuck it, dried it for 2 years, and built the building out of the wood that was on it. The only things that we needed were fasteners, obviously shingles, and glass. But other than that, it was all built from here.
So by building it with materials on site, you're able to circumvent the university issues?
Because I was doing it as a learning laboratory.
Yes.
We weren't building buildings.
No. Yeah, that's cool though.
Yeah, we are doing a demonstration in sustainability.
I like it.
So spin it however it needs to happen to make it happen.
Yeah.
So
Or else it wouldn't have happened.
it wouldn't happen. To the left, where that big opening is, actually was to store a. I think it's like a 30-foot war canoe that Northeast Passage was donated. So we stored that. So we built the building in part for that storage for that. So it's fun. What the heck?
Yeah, go for it.
Still works really well. The war canoe has moved on to other worlds, but anyway. So a great example of someone's so. Have you ever heard the phrase, the answer to how is yes? And if someone says no, just ask again. Just make sure you change your question. So, the same answer.
Keep coming back.
That's right. And for me, I was just persistent, but hopefully not so annoying that no was going to come down as a big no. So that's that. So. Let's walk into the challenge course. So I interviewed about 5 different arborists because I knew once I went with an arborist, I was going to go with them for the duration. I'm not going to switch every year. Each one has a different philosophy around trees, especially around challenge courses. None of these arborists knew about challenge courses, but they knew about trees. The challenge course builders know a little bit about trees, but not a lot about trees. They just only know enough about trees to build challenge courses. So many of the building practices of challenge course builders are harmful for trees. Because think about it, if the tree dies, they get to come back and build another element. Not saying
Planned
that
obsolescence.
not saying that there's
how I got a
that
new computer.
malintent. It's just building according to tree health slows the process down and makes it a lot more expensive. So what I said was no one's going to come on the course unless they were working with an arborist. And then I started with the arborist because the trees are forever. People can come and go in my world. And then interviewed different challenge course providers, builders, to see who is going to be willing to work with the arborist to the standards that both are agreeing. Because, I mean, of course, the arborist could be absurd, and you couldn't build a challenge course, and vice versa, so it was a collaboration. In the end, after about 5 years, and we also did some research on it, we did pressure fertilization of steroids here and not across the way. And these trees are actually healthier than the stand across the way that has no one walking in it. Which makes me feel pretty good about what we're doing given how we're using the trees in this way.
Are those injections, Pam, into the trees?
Into the soil.
Okay. So what if you're reading between the lines, right? What we're talking about here is that, and I didn't really talk to you about this much, but we looked at a lot of those courses, more so pay-to-plays that were, field with telephone poles, right? Well, this is not, the trees are not just used for the setting here, but the trees are actually components of many of the elements that you will see, right? And so that game between arborists and challenge course builders, right, needed to be fine-tuned so that you can preserve these trees for the long term. And the ground compaction, right, is leading to sort of issues with trees, right? And so they're injecting things into the soil that is effectively making these trees significantly healthier.
Along with the wood chips. And in our research, we found out that getting wood chips in the spring, the wood chips have the growth hormone of the tree. So we try to get a big amount in the spring so that actually those growth hormones in the wood chips have allowed us to reduce the amount of pressure fertilization into the ground.
These studies, are they like fully you guys? How much do you share with the university? Is any of that like studies based from the university?
I guess when I say studies, it's like me studying
Yeah,
the
of course.
ground.
Observation.
It's
More observation based.
And yes, thank you, observation. And because I felt so strongly about it, I was a keynote speaker for ACCT around tree health and safety
Cool.
I think
with my arborists.
How often do you guys like put the stuff in the ground?
I keep an arborist on retainer. In the beginning, it was $10,000 a year. Now I give him $5,000 a year because I have a better sense of what I can do, and he just prioritizes what the trees need. So it's not me dictating what they need because.
on average, is it usually like once a year with the pressure fertilization, or we're talking
Yes,
about the decade?
thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. It's this long T-handled thing, and it's literally like you're injecting the ground.
And Pam, I'll speak for her maybe, is that Pam is very modest, and I think in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of the things that she's doing out here and determining are like she's on the cutting edge of these things. Setting maybe the precedent for how tree advantage ropes courses should be sustainably managed, things of this nature. So, I'll just say it for you.
Good. Back to what you do is important and how you do what you do. Like, really? We're going to kill trees while we tell people to have healthy relationships?
Yeah,
How is that okay?
right. My
so-
favorite is let's just cut down all the trees and put in telephones.
Right,
What?
and then we're going to bake in the sun, but we'll put up shade.
Yeah.
And then we're going to, so that
But be careful of lightning strikes.
That's right.
Yeah.
once you start, once we introduce ourselves to a system, now we're managing the system due to our introduction. Not bad or good, just be aware of our impact. Now can we mitigate it and hopefully in relationship as opposed to in opposition. Good point, yeah. Pole courses are not my favorite to work on.
And they're not bad. I don't want to knock them too much. I'm just saying they're very opposite of what this is.
Yeah.
I work on a pole course, and like what you were saying, like the heat, it's horrible. it's like I feel like I'm a lifeguard, but I can't jump in the water. You know?
And you're stuck there.
Yeah,
That's the
and it's
thing.
like upwards
the
of
element,
hours.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're on
And
an
you
upper
can-
element, you're there. You can't seek something shelter.
We can have 100 people on this course, and we always
Wow.
keep it a ratio of 1 to 10, 1 facilitator per 10
It's good to
people.
know. 1 to 10.
And you will not see them because of the trees. Everybody's having their own unique custom experience as opposed to being in an athletic field and going, hey, what are they doing? They're having more fun. I want to do that. Just the sense of intimacy, connection that trees allow for. And then, of course, you can throw in what we know about eco-psychology
Right.
and tree bathing and blah, blah, blah.
Nature restoration.
It's all of the above. So there's a place for all of it. Tree courses are way more expensive because trees grow, trees die. And you've already heard some of the expenses of the maintenance of them. However, I worked on a pole course in Western Mass. They built this beautiful pole course, and the next year they had to tear the whole thing down. Pileated woodpeckers.
Oh, God. Got one in my backyard doing work right now.
Yep. So you can't escape it. That Mother Nature will win. So how can you work in concert? Keep
All
on.
right, let's check out some stuff back here.
Nobody get lost.
Started here.
Pam, you want to talk about
Created
Sure, absolutely. So you kind of get a sense of my philosophy
Check it
about
out, take
things.
pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it didn't make sense to me to have a course where the things that make you successful, in part, are physical, such as strength, dexterity, balance, are not the things that are going to make you successful in creating a psychologically safe learning environment in the 5th grade. So that there wasn't a parallel metaphor. So I wanted to develop, for two things. I wanted to develop a place that everybody could come and participate fully, whatever that meant to them. And I wanted to develop activities where the same things that make you successful in business or in the classroom or wherever it is are the things that are going to make you successful on the activity. So I was lucky enough to have and I am lucky enough to have a friend, Danny Burke. And Danny Burke and Danny was my impetus to run my first marathon, of which he was a part of. To skydive in tandem, to do a 3,000-mile bike trip that raised money to create a nonprofit. I could go on and on about Danny. And I could also tell you that Danny is quadriplegic and nonverbal. It's the same Danny. So I said, Danny, he wanted to run a marathon. So we had the high school Voc class build a running wheelchair, because back then in the 80s there wasn't such a thing. And we got a lot of people together to raise money, and we ran a marathon. And it was really kind of funny because we got a flat tire and they're not quick release wheels, and I was like pumping out in the duct tape, and like 6 hours later, yeah, where's the finish line? It's gone. Oh yay! That kind of thing. Nonetheless, with that $10,000, I approached Project Adventure and said, if we come up with some ideas, all of us, whoever wants to, would you be willing to implement them, but we'll buy with the money we have the hardware? So there was no cost. All of us are going to figure it out. I'm not interested in patenting anything, copywriting anything. I'm just interested in having things that feel morally and ethically just for me, for the Browne Center. And your job is to disseminate it around the world if it's a good idea. Like, I don't care what you do with it. So this activity came from, there was this activity that was called a hanging log. Think of this gigantic log, about the same length, hanging from a rope, and you put the log itself was the radius of the circle. And the deal was, imagine the log is here. It's about like this. All of us had to get on that log and have it balanced without anybody touching the circle. Wonderful activity, terrifying to facilitate, because the first two people up on it, you know, it's going back and forth and wheeling, you know, you can hold the rope. The next two people are holding the people. The next, like, it's a really bad idea, but it was really fun. Except when someone fell off, then everybody would fall off, and now you have this telephone pole, like, winging at people's heads, you know? So it was terrifying, and it was always the best part of my day when it's over. So I thought, okay, how is Danny going to do the telephone pole? So I basically said, how is Danny going to do every single typical traditional element? And so it took a year. Simplicity is brilliance. Most of us can create very complicated things. To create something simple is really quite brilliant. So it took over a year to figure out really what we're talking about is balance. We just want people to balance. And then we prototyped. We had extruded metal so that people in wheelchairs could roll on it. We had bowling balls in the middle. We had all these kind of things that were incredibly expensive and didn't make sense. So finally, John Lazarus and myself came out and literally built this one. This is it. This is the first one. And at the end of it, we're like, this is pretty cool because you can move this back and forth, and so people can create different fulcrums, and you get the idea. At the end, John Lazarus goes, well, you know, whoever builds it gets to name it. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of fun. He goes, let's call it my idea. And I'm like, well, John, I helped out. You know, like, come on. I got some ego here. He goes, no, it is so simple that everybody's going to think it's their idea. So I was like, oh, that was a brilliant name. So at first was called My Idea. Of course, that doesn't make much sense. So Project Venture switched it to Whale Watch because if you're on a whale watch, that's kind of what happens. So what I love about it is chances are you're not going to find a hanging log. And that, for me, is like the brilliance of universal programming, that you've made it better for everybody. Not just so Danny could do this, that you made it better for everybody. So, yeah, this is a great one. I'll show you a few others that were developed here and have been disseminated. And I won't tell that story now, I'll tell you when we get there. I used to keep all our failures up, because it's the same thing. Like for every good idea, there's at least 5 that weren't. So I'd literally keep them up in the trees, and people are like, "Sam, you gotta stop with that." Like, no, it's like a museum. Let me show you why that didn't work. Because then you don't have to make the same mistake. You know, I had done a cargo net, like, oh, people who use wheelchairs, they must be really strong, upper body. No, maybe for this, but not for this. Like, I had all these, I didn't know. We had an activity that ran between 2 trees, because I loved gym scooters when I was a little kid. You know what I mean? What I'm talking about? You always run over your fingers. And so it was 2 wires that went between 2 trees, and it was a platform that locked on, so that if you're an incredible athlete, for instance, you can push off of it and jump on and surf across. If you're Danny, he can direct people through tongue thrusts, how fast or slow to bring him up. He gets on, and you remember those red wagons that you put the sides on? Yeah, so you put the sides on that would support him, and we had this, I took a parachute harness to make it, because he needed all body supports, and then he could direct me with his tongue thrust to the group down below as to how fast or slow we wanted to go. That's what it eventually became. Prior to that, though, after consulting a lot of different people about how do I make these activities more accessible, ideally more universal, we came up with many bad ideas. And I just took some pipe cleaners and Legos and everything else and threw it in a class like this size. Said, you all come up with something. And many of the things were by people who had no idea about challenge courses. So sometimes it's helpful to jump out of what's seen as the expert.
Step outside the box.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, we're going to have a big, like, welcome to the Universal Challenge course. But prior to that, all of us testing it, I called us the After Hours Club. So here's the deal. we don't know what we're doing, so we can't sue each other. This is not a university-sponsored thing. This is a group of people trying to figure it out. And twice we could have really hurt people. You know, we had a full body harness that actually hung too low. And luckily this person, as they're heading towards this rock, had the upper body strength to pull themselves up and not like ram right into it. I mean, all kinds of, or like, how do you do a trust fall when someone doesn't have body rigidity? You know, so we're hanging off and dropping people, and, you know. So we finally think we figured it out. And Danny comes. He was, you know, part of the whole idea. A lot of people here, PTs, OTs. Northeast Passage wasn't a part of UNH at this point, otherwise I'd be like, they'd be here too, I know. And so Danny comes up, and because we didn't know what we were doing, we put a lot of ropes on him. Like it's kind of like if you can't tie knots, tie lots. I know, 10 hitches, that should do it, you know. Same kind of thing, like, whoa, you know, whoa. So I'm attached to a tree, another person's attached to a tree, 20 feet up. Danny's on the scooter, everything's looking good. We've got 2 different belay ropes. He's rolling across, you know, I'm like, this is great. You know, it's like the only high element we had at the time. And then he has a seizure. Flings his body like this, tips over. I mean, we have a lot of ropes. He's not going anywhere, but that's the problem. Yeah. One of the ropes came right across his neck. And so there I am attached to a tree, seeing about to you, Danny with a rope across his neck, and I'm like, oh, and I'm stuck because I'm attached to the tree. We were able to lower him, little rope burn, nothing else. Being the consummate professional that I am, I burst into tears and said, go home, everybody go home, this was a bad idea, who was I thinking I could do this? I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. Everybody goes home. I'm still blubbering in the tree. 6 months later, Danny has a light stick, and he's actually beginning to communicate. According to his father, the first letter he composed with help was to me, which was, how dare you? You've led expeditions, you do things that have never been done before. The first time in my life I get a chance, you told me to go home.
Wasn't mad about the rope.
I was like, okay, come on back, let's see what we can do. So it was wonderful because he helped me understand that people with disabilities aren't broken. They have to be able to have the same intrinsic risk that we do. Hopefully, the perceived risk high, the actual risk low. That's part of what makes the challenge course fun.
Equity.
And,
Equity.
yeah. So it was a great life lesson that Danny provided for me that time. And we had many more adventures since then. But that was a big one. So from that, we kindled it, and I said, okay, no one's doing this, because when people would call them, they're like, why would I come to a place that's physical if I don't think of myself as physical? If I'm trying to fit into my class, why would I come to some place that's going to make me look different? Like, doesn't make so challenge courses go, well, we never get the demand. I'm like, well, no, anyway. But to the story, and so I had to sell this. It's not like people were beating the doors to come. It's just like, no, now we have enough for program, let's go. One activity called the flying squirrel, person's in a full body harness, which was interesting because I couldn't get any harness makers to build the harness that I had made out of a bus wheel and a parachute. Because they're like, you don't have the calling for it, and the liability's too high. It's like, but anyway, so here we are in this funky stuff, but we're doing it anyway. And I'd always keep a regular, approved harness and helmet, so you could see the duplicities are insane. But had a group. One fellow, his name was Michael, I'll call him Michael, was in a chair. Later on, I found out the story that he had been a star quarterback in high school. In his junior years, motorcycle accident, had broken his neck, and became paraplegic. And so he was not interested in doing any activities whatsoever. He was like very depressed, closed down person. we're at the Flying Squirrel, and I'm having everybody, not everybody does the full body harness. So it's not special for Michael. Everybody gets into this whole, which is actually kind of more fun. Plus people who are pregnant, and all kinds of folks use it. And so I'm like, so Michael, you gonna go? And he's like, no, I don't think so. It's like, well, he doesn't have to be my friend, that other people build that rapport. So I got in his face. I'm like, what? You scared? He's like, and I'm like, yeah. Well, then why aren't you doing it? So I'm just going. I need to wake this person up. Even if it's anger, something other than apathy. So I'm like, well, just do it then. I'm not scared. Well, come on then. I just start doing it, with it, like the harness and things like that. And he's not saying no. He's not saying yes, but he's not saying no. So I'm doing it. And I'm like, until I hit say no, we're just doing it. So what it is he's in a full body harness attached to a rope that goes to a pulley that comes down to the rest of the boot. Just he pulls, he goes up. So I'm like, okay, let's just raise you up, make sure everything's right, don't have to settle, whatever. Raise it up, everything's good. I'm like, you want to go? He goes, yeah. I'm like, oh, you say it, I'm not going to say it. So he has to use his voice loud, because he goes, right, go ahead and pull. I'm like, I'm pulling for you. Come on. Are you in or not? And so he's like, it's kind of interesting. He's just like, it came out of nowhere. And he goes up, and that same big voice from the top, he goes, look at me. And I'm like, I am looking, it's great. He goes, no, look at me. I'm like, I am looking. And he goes, no, look at me. That's my wheelchair, and I'm not in it. I am not my chair. Of course, the whole classroom, myself, are like, whoa, this is great, And there was more people, I think, that learned from how they perceived Mike than perhaps Mike. It was incredible, and from that moment on, I realized this is key, I think, for an educational challenge course or therapeutic. The activity doesn't carry the learning. I couldn't have gone up. So as a facilitator, the only tool you have is you and your bag of tricks. So I don't think of myself as a particularly confrontive person. I'm like most people who like to be liked and everything else. Mike didn't need another liked person. He needed someone to get in his face and go, what are you scared? And I need to be able to do that and not worry about what he thinks or cares about me, because they're not hiring me, they're hiring an outcome. So that is the degree of the art of facilitation. Really, I think anybody, you can even have tape recorder what the rules of activities are. That's not the hard part. The hard part is knowing how to use yourself as a way of helping an individual and a group reach their goals. And that's why I want the best facilitators possible so people can learn from them. Because you're not going to be the Pam or the Mike, you've got to be the you. But first you have to see what's possible, as opposed to just reading the recipe. And it's like interning at it with a chef. So there's a lot of chefs out here. So please come when there's more programming.
It's a tangible versus intangible that we talked about so much, The intangibles, the vast majority of the experience. So, questions?
The time we have, we can still hike to the
With
front.
an element like this, your imagination is the limit. So passing through, but as Pam, was this the actual feature from the story?
So the activity was the spider web that I spoke about with the construction workers.
And they were touching it, and they weren't, shouldn't be.
So
But,
literally
if pass people through this would be the idea. No touching it, though.
Yeah, so the frame might be, as you've seen from my design build criteria, I have 10 things. I want this, I want a room that does this, I want this, I want this. And more than a lot of them, I want quality. Quality is my number one thing. Quality is not having touched. That's not poor quality. Poor quality is having touched and not start again according to the rules. And so let me give you 5 minutes, talk amongst yourself, decide how many of these things you think you can do, come back, we'll negotiate, we'll go from there, each part of that. And then they started passing through. It was usually one of these. Or typically what happens is someone's coming through and no one's looking. That's the key. No one's looking. So that was the whole learning, was to stop them and go, so how'd it go? Great. Some of them didn't see the touch. I'm like, of course you wouldn't. You weren't looking. I want everybody to be looking when they build this building. So.
And one other thing that we were talking about too, so when we're talking about safety systems, right? Dynamic belay versus static belay. So to be clear, all of the high elements here use a dynamic belay. Okay? And what Pam was mentioning, I think, is an important point before we forget, is that the standard here at this facility is that all participants belay other participants. Okay? What do you think about that model? Pros and cons of participants belaying other participants? Yeah.
It builds trust between participants.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, what else? What other pros to that model? What do you think?
Learning, you get to belay, so that's the relationship between the two people, but they're also learning how to belay and then trusting that person to belay them, and then if it's going back and forth, that's a new bond. Right.
Definitely, right? So we've got this trust element and a skill set. Others, what other people think?
Teamwork.
Teamwork, yep. Yeah. Nico, what do you think?
Communication.
Yep. All of these things, right? And there's just that added, I don't know how to, skin in the game,
Yeah.
right? That, and there's that risk element a little bit. Like I'm climbing and I'm thinking, sure hoping Nico was paying attention, you know, as I'm up there and so on, right? And the same when you're up. So, so really, and that was a very, as you were mentioning, right? This was ahead of the game.
Yeah, no
People
one.
weren't doing this.
Nope, it was one of those like, this is not a SOP, standard operating procedure.
And remember that that's going to, because our one-to-one ratio typically in that scenario on a dynamic safety system, now that cuts down on that dramatically. So now it was 1 to 10 is the standard here, right?
Right.
Right.
And everybody had to climb belay and safety before you kind of can back off and always have different backups. And there's different kinds of belays. There's P-bus, there's team belay, there's Australian, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Are those standards still like up like to date now? Like, can you just like have a group come in and they learn how to belay and then belay someone, or do you have to like you can still do that? Wow.
So I kind of pride myself for having created this belay school, I call it belay school, where group of 5th graders, everybody can climb belay and safety in an hour.
Wow.
Wow.
And then they have 3 hours of which, as long as they get a safety check before they go, they can choose the activities. And I ask them to choose an activity, one, because they want to do it, like you want to jump and catch this, or you want to go and get the line. But the other, so one for fun, and the other for that what the activity could teach you. So, if I was leaping, I love leaping. I love letting go of projects and just like letting her rip. These long slogs, you know, is not my idea of a good time. So I would choose that one for fun, and I would choose this one for what does it take for me to have long, sustained, no payoff type of tasks in my life. So you're creating metaphors to help people not just experience something, but decide what is it in my life that would be helpful. A little bit about the belaying, so you get an understanding. Sometimes I have people tie their own harnesses, tie in, you know, and they'll go, is this right? I'm like, I don't know, what do you think? And they're like, what? And I'm like, who else in your group might know if it's right or not? So, you know, why are we gonna hoard information that they could be learning from one another? Had a group from the women's prison, and the young women were literally in handcuffs to their basically security, and they're coming. I'm like, well, this will be usually like, how do you do activities? But ultimately, I had the prisoners belaying those other folks that were managing the security. And when they came down, the prisoners were, one woman in particular just lost it. She goes, I didn't think I'd ever be trustworthy again for anybody. Right? Or there we are at the chimney.
You can cry it.
I know, I'm like, that's so
Somewhat two-dimensional. What would happen if you also can go three-dimensional? In other words, if I was always rolling around in a chair, what happens when I start swinging? So, so we built a low, basically zip wire, so that someone who's in a chair can zip. We took blood pressure, respiration, heart rate here, and then we did it at the end. And it seemed reasonable, and so we're like, okay, let's try it again. So we go to an actual zip line, and we put the person in shock. Wow! I mean, literally, like, turns white. We're like, okay, we're all you know. So for us, it was all around, like, what are the forces that can be on a body that we need to be aware of? Really, really cool is, I think, more than anything else, it was psychogenic shock, because we hadn't done the typical sequencing of activities. Tag games, up through a spider web, low this and that. We went from the parking lot to a zip line. So then we're like, okay, well, let's keep trying with this. And we found that even in the course of 6 hours, a person could do the zip line, but not if you go from the parking lot to the zip line.
It's a lot more intense than the whale watch, you know, and things like that. So what do you see? What are your observations?
Owls.
Owls. Why? Why owls?
Scares away the other owls.
Scares away what?
We talked about what killed the,
Oh, the woodpecker.
Woodpeckers, right? Another. Yep. What else do you see? What do you observe when you look at these elements? I mean, walk around, guys. Check them out and everything. What do you see? Talk to me. So you see a lot of the hooks up the sides, right, for climbing? Yeah. Okay, what else? What else do you see? How do you think this challenge even works?
of which there's many
Right.
on this tree. And this was a tree that died, and because it was, as you can see behind it, so it was such an important anchor point, we decided to invest in a pole.
Sometimes you gotta go for it.
I have a question. It's kind of a two-part question. Is this place open in the winter? And if it is or isn't, what do you do in terms of maintenance for the elements?
Sure. We don't ever close it unless it was a windstorm or something that we need to check the safety, of course. And Jeff Fregon, man of many hats,
Hey again.
including youth and student programming, and oftentimes does this tour. What do? You could answer that question.
We wear a lot of clothing. The programs tend to be shorter. So if you think who would be willing to come out and do a program outside in the winter, right? So it tends to be smaller groups, private schools, or small school groups usually, or college groups, smaller groups. And the programming is usually built around either time inside at the main building. Did you show them Corroboree yet?
No, we're about to start to do the circle.
Yeah, so on your way out, you'll see our four-season yurt. It's folks come and we usually start inside and then we go out and we program until people get cold. And then we go inside and we do more stuff and then we go out until they get cold again. So the programs look differently, but we still do it. It's just very self-selective. Folks, not a lot of clients come able to be outside and be comfortable, although I don't know about y'all, but there's so many days when in February and it's 35 and you're like, I'm in a t-shirt, this is great.
Telephone pole, you'll also see two wires going out like this, two people pushing against each other, go as far as they can, out.
See these two main guidelines right here is what she's talking about?
Yeah.
Comes to an apex and then
Like a
comes
high
down.
V.
That's a pretty difficult challenge if you think about it, right?
Yeah. And when you fall face in, and that's why you have a chest harness on. You can see some ropes down so that you can use that for hand ropes for the seams. So whatever creativity, you can have people blindfolded, go backwards, connected with tissue paper that they can't break, whatever. Once again, it's not about the activity, it's about what is it that they're trying to practice and learn, and providing those options.
I just wanted to point something out to you all, just so that you understand, right? This is paracord or P-cord as it's sometimes called, right? This is not climbing rope. All this is a guide for the climbing rope. In other words, they're not going to leave climbing rope out here in the weather and the elements to wither. You can grab that, tie your climbing rope onto it, and then pull it up through whatever you need to. And ultimately what I'm getting at is you see how these are all tucked up away. So we have the ropes taken down and these are tucked up, and this is all part of the safety protocol, right? Attractive nuisances and things like that. People, of course, can come out here and walk on the course for better or for worse. So you want to limit your liability and risk. So you're putting these up there so that people can't climb on as easily. You notice where the footholds start and things like that. So it's not just easily accessible. I think one could strongly argue that someone up there had no business being up there at 3 in the morning, and they went to a lot of effort to get up there.
Especially if they brought cable cutters to cut the lock that locks the ladders.
Yes.
Comes over, use the ladders, and then climb. Then
Yeah. Oh, that's my fault? Yeah.
yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah.
I
The
found
fact that the trees really provide that buffer and the topography of the area. In other words, when you have a group of 10-year-old kids who are rambunctious and ready to go, and you're 10 over here, and you're trying to do a low element, right, and trying to get them to think, they don't see their other 10 friends right over here on the element, and they're, oh, what are they doing, oohing and ahhing and so on. So it's a really big pro for this type of facility. Just the overall vibe, I can't stress it enough, of it being in the woods.
I like high elements to be 2-person whenever possible, so just more adaptation. So I'd be in a sit harness, a chest harness, as would you. 2 of us climb up this pole, get onto the platform together, and jump for the trapeze together.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Doesn't happen very often.
Maintenance, I mean, true preventative maintenance here. The low-hanging fruit is the injection. Okay. Routine maintenance, there's a lot of routine maintenance. Jeff's doing it right now. Right? Routine maintenance is simple as going around tightening bolts, checking things as visual inspection. There's endless routine maintenance here, I'm sure. Mice in the cabinets. You talk about the ropes and the harnesses, right? All of those things. And then, of course, corrective maintenance being all-out replacement of features. The first one, we would have covered campgrounds and different structures, but we haven't. So, this is a yurt. It's a really cool feature. It speaks for itself, so check it out. Very neat. And I know there are probably numerous, right? But if you had to narrow it down to your top 2, what would you say are your top 2 pros and cons of the Browne Center?
So
From a facility standpoint.
I was about to say people,
Yeah.
of course. I mean,
Yeah.
major beyond that, but wow, I wish I had prepped me with that one. But
Yeah.
that's okay. Maybe it's better that you didn't. I would definitely say, what as you said, if we walked along, is that folks can have a intimate, customized experience, whether they're the only group on the course or whether they're one of 100 people. So that alone speaks to the I want to be an individual and unique, and I want to belong. So you can flow that very easily, and then we can go back down in the field, and all 100 of us can do an activity that only 100 people can do.
Right. So the topography and the landscape, right? Big. The setting, effectively, right? Huge pro.
And for myself, that there's a space that will meet the needs of everyone. That this space works really well, because it's like, you're not gonna hurt it. So those kids that you're a little, or anybody that you're a little worried about with the sheetrock and the upholstery and everything else, this doesn't cost much. I mean, you just have to sweep it. The other part is that the main building has such flexibility. You know, you can have a small group of 5 and literally rent sofas and sit around the fire. Like, who has a strategic planning meeting at the fireside?
Right.
So we have some unique features that other folks don't have. That more importantly than the competition is it allows us to choose the setting that is going to enhance the reason why people are here. So it's able to be customized. Maybe that's the second one.
Very nice.
Multi-purpose.
What about cons? Do any cons of the facility come to mind?
Tree courses.
I was going to say tree courses, right?
Maintenance.
Which is a double-edged sword. That's a pro, big pro. I would say more of a pro than a con, but it is definitely a con. In terms of facilities and maintenance, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Oh, completely. So the tree courses.
It's expensive.
Yeah. The other part is when the building was built, we were trying to be on the leading edge of environmental, and in such, a lot of the things really are not, they're very expensive to maintain, and if I had my druthers, I'd get rid of most of them and put in what we have now. So our leach field is 3 times bigger than it needs to be. in the floor radiant heat has 4 different zones. There's a security system that never really worked, but got me up every morning at like 2 in the morning to come down and turn it off. You know, so the systems were on the cutting edge and didn't necessarily reflect best practices.
Okay.
So my strength was my weakness. You know, trying back to the, let me show you all the things that don't work. Well, one of which is the insides of that building.
And I guess, and one other component that we sort of like to end tours on is just talking about, so these are all outstanding recreation professionals, right? And so now many will be a part of OLM, the new option. If they hope to be in your shoes one day, or in Jeff's shoes and working at a facility like this, what advice might you lend to them? What advice might you lend to these students?
Start with why it exists. So get deep into that. So it would be tough to come in as a construction person and create the same spirit, vibe, customization if you didn't know what the facility was for. So get in at the ground level, see the user interface, understand what do they experience, and then work. You know, you don't have to be there forever, but you have enough so you have a sense of what is working for them. And then check back in every year or two. You know, I try to do a youth group, a corporate group, at least a few times a season. So I don't rely on 20-year-old information like, well, I was doing this. You know, no. Get down there, get down into the trenches and understand it.
And there are certifications that are important, right? ACCT, what is it, 1 and 2?
Level 1 and 2, and it's really important to remember that certifications are expensive, and they're not always the be-all, end-all.
Right.
So that if you were creating a log for yourself of experience, working on challenge courses, working on everything else, what you're needing to prove is that A, stay current in the field, and how do you do that? Do you go to conferences, what webinars, do blah, blah, blah. And then document how much you've been doing so that your experience might be, because what you've done, as defensible in a court of law than someone who's ACCT level 2 certified. Because that expert witness from ACCT is going to be attacked by the defense attorney, and they're going to try to discredit ACCT. And if they do, you might actually shine. So you can't just, I'm certified, and then that's it. Because know that it's you saying, I know what's supposed to be done here. So having been an expert witness and seen both sides of these things, remember, certification is a business. People are not doing it just because they love challenge courses. So be really a smart consumer because you have to keep them up. So.